All right, so in this module, we're going to discuss the theory of plate tectonics. And so this is a pretty big deal when we talk about geology. It is a theory that was developed fairly recently, probably in the 60s. This idea was kind of put together and started to be accepted. And now it is an accepted theory in geology, and that is because it explains a lot of the data that we see. And so how we're going to go through here is the main idea of plate tectonics, of course, is that there is a brittle surface to our Earth. And you know a little bit about this because we talk about the idea of the interior of the Earth. When we talked about that, we introduced, that there's the crust mantle core, but there's also a different way to look at the interior, and that's the lithosphere and asthenosphere, so the brittle part and the kind of gooey part, right? And so these brittle parts are broken and they cover the Earth and they interact with each other. This is the main point of plate tectonics, is this interaction of these plates, and they can interact in a variety of ways. And so in order to kind of go through this information, what I'm going to have you do is visit the USGS site here. And when you do so, it's going to pop up this website here. And then you can scroll down and see that there are 8 parts to this website. And so I want you to go through each of these and read the content. There's some images embedded in here. There's some short little video clips embedded in here. But it's basically going to go through the evolution of how did we get here? What evidence did we see that we wanted to explain and couldn't, and so we had to come up with a theory for. And this led us to this theory of plate tectonics and how it continues to support the evidence that we see, right? So this is, we know from understanding science and how the scientific method works, it's not only does our theory explain the data, but new data comes along and it still fits that new data. And so go ahead and go through here. Just be aware there's additional links within the pages themselves. You don't have to go through all the extra stuff. So at the end of the historical perspectives, there's something called endnotes. You don't have to go there and read that additional stuff unless you so choose, but you'll be kind of quizzed on the content that's just in these here, right? So just kind of pop through those, read the content, get an idea of plate tectonics. I also gave you a couple other things. One is on the right here, there's a video that shows earthquake and volcano locations. This is a piece of evidence, or pieces if we include volcanoes and earthquakes, that helped us figure out that there's something going on here, that earthquakes and volcanoes tend to show up in specific zones. And why was that? Well, the idea was interactions of plates are causing earthquakes, and in most cases causing volcanoes. And so this is just a visual for you to see that. This one here on the left is in the notes and in the USGS page. When you're going through the content, it's going to talk about the boundaries, right? So we can have plates that are colliding into each other. We call those convergent plate boundaries. We can have plates that are moving away from each other. We call those divergent, and plates that slide past each other. And so what I did here was put a collection of the different types of boundaries and kind of what's happening there. And so I'm hoping that, I know the content's here, but this visualization here will hopefully be helpful to you so you can kind of see what's happening in this plate tectonic story. Because, of course, after we do plate tectonics, and it's a little challenging because you don't have a lot of geologic knowledge under your belt, and there's some weird stuff happening like melting of materials and stuff like that. But we're going to talk about that in subsequent modules. When we talk about igneous rocks in particular, we're going to tie it back to plate tectonics. So you can't just look at this and forget it, right? So I want you to understand how the plate tectonics theory works. And so there's also a little study guide here. It's just terminology, things you should know, because there's a lot of information here, and I don't want you to get overwhelmed. So take a look at that, and if you can, I know what a subduction zone is. Okay, I feel good about that. I know what a divergent plate boundary is. So just kind of, if you would like, of course, use that to help you. And that's for the main lecture, of course. And then the 2 other things you'll do for the lecture are the Hawaiian hotspot here. And so there is an addendum, if you will, to the plate tectonic theory, and that is this idea that there are some places where we get volcanoes away from plate boundaries. And this is an idea that explains that. So you can read that article and answer the questions in that quiz. And for the final thing for your homework, we're going to look back at some of the additional information that you weren't required to look at for the main lecture. It'll just be some additional questions, a little video, some things for you to ponder about plate tectonic theory. Of course, not timed. The homework is not timed, so you can just kind of go through that content and take your time to do that. That's what you'll do in the main lecture stuff. And then, of course, remember, you always have a lab. Now, we talked about a little bit that the labs will be off a little bit. So here's our plate tectonic content that you'll do. There are some additional resources. I sometimes forget to mention that. But you can go ahead and click there, and we'll just do that. What the heck? And there's some cool stuff, visual stuff. There's some reading, and there's even a little video if you'd like to look at those things. They're available for you. But getting back to our module, we have our plate tectonics. We're going to look at maps in lab. And so what you'll find is for the first 3 labs, they're not super consistent with the lecture, and then after that, they'll match up much better. But we have to get you understanding maps and map reading because we use those in subsequent labs. So this is just a topographic map lab, how to read a topographic map. And it is set up exactly like the other lab you just took. Same format, same system. You can retake it as many times as you'd like. You do need to get a 70% or better for it to count and all that kind of good stuff. And so that's kind of where we're working for this week. So plate tectonics and lecture, topos and lab, and any questions, comments, concerns, all that stuff. If you have some questions about the content or anything else that you need help with, please don't hesitate to contact me.